Election meddling. On his final day at the UN, President Trump accuses a country of trying to interfere in November's midterms. And it's not Russia. We're in New York. Supreme drama. Senators are scrambling ahead of tomorrow's make-or-break testimony for Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. We'll have a report. Keep the faith. Pope Francis writes a letter to Catholics in China explaining his decision about a deal with the communist nation. We have a report from Rome. And made for happiness.
God is saying that your history does not determine your destiny.
Find out what drew 14,000 Catholics to Lansing, Michigan. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, September 26, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Trump accuses China of meddling in the upcoming U.S. election. He says the communist country doesn't want him to succeed because he's tough on them. This revelation comes in the midst of today's high-level meetings at the United Nations. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby joins us from the UN headquarters in New York City. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. We expected President Trump to blast Iran for spreading terrorism throughout the Middle East and the world, but he did single them out. However, he also made headlines with an allegation against China.
Regrettably, we found that China has been attempting to interfere in our upcoming 2018 election.
President Trump tells world leaders gathered at the UN Security Council China is targeting his administration.
They do not want me or us to win because I am the first president ever to challenge China on trade.
U.S. intelligence officials say they're also trying to prevent election meddling from Russia, North Korea, and Iran. The president describes Iran as the world's leading sponsor of terror, fueling conflict around the region and far beyond.
The murderous regime and its supporters will face significant consequences if they do not change their behavior.
National Security Advisor John Bolton calls the Obama-era nuclear deal with Iran the worst diplomatic debacle in American history. President Trump pulled the U.S. out of the deal in May and reimposed sanctions against the Middle Eastern country. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani spoke at the UN yesterday. He's critical of the U.S., but says he's still open to dialogue. Protesters say the Iranian government does not represent its people. They gathered outside the UN on Monday to call for regime change. Bernard Henry Levy also blasts Iran for trying to destabilize places like Iraq. The French philosopher and political activist tells me he's seen the problems firsthand.
They prosecute the Kurds, the Christians, and the Sunnis who resist their influence. They are really a bad force.
Levy says we need to do more to protect religious minorities from Iran's interference. I also talked to Norman Rule, a senior advisor with an organization called United Against Nuclear Iran. He says Iran tries to neutralize any political party that's opposed to its ideology. Lauren?
Wyatt, President Trump's accusation against China came as a bit of a surprise. Did he offer any evidence of election meddling?
Well, President Trump says there is plenty of evidence, but he didn't go into any specifics. Now, China's foreign minister denies the allegations. He says his country does not interfere in any other country's domestic affairs. Now, cyber experts at this point have yet to find any proof, they say, of Chinese meddling in U.S. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the United Nations in New York City. Joining me now from New York City is Zurab Amari, senior writer for Commentary Magazine. Zurab, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
1 year ago at the UN, President Trump derided North Korean President Kim Jong-un as Little Rocket Man. And now, following their summit this June in Singapore, he describes him as, quote, terrific. What's the likelihood we'll see a face-to-face between President Trump and Iran's President Rouhani?
I don't think it's as likely as the North Korea situation. It's a different kind of scenario. Iranian leaders have all sorts of their own internal allergies about sitting down with the United States, the great Satan, as it were. But who knows? I mean, this is a presidency that is capable of doing some wild and unthinkable things from time to time, so we should always be open to surprises. I think my sense of the smart money is that it's not going to happen.
National Security Advisor John Bolton warned Iran's leaders about the consequences of crossing the U.S., saying there would be hell to pay. How much of an influence do you think Bolton is having on U.S. policy toward Iran?
Well, this is a presidency where there's, I think, a great importance placed on principles, and especially National Security Advisor, I think John Bolton does play an important role. His themes are in line in many ways with President Trump's own instincts, his emphasis on U.S. sovereignty, his disdain for international institutions and what one would call transnationalism. They share that. And I think they both take a tough line against the Iranian regime.
We did hear the word sovereignty used quite a bit. Could this America First position on everything from foreign policy to trade disputes backfire as a political strategy long term?
I think that it's a mixed bag. There are situations in which constantly saying America First, constantly, attacking allied leaders, as the president tends to do sometimes, does backfire. NATO, for example, is an area where it's an institution that has helped secure the U.S. They've backed us in various interventions in the past. The only time that NATO has actually invoked the Article 5 commitment to mutual defense was actually after 9/11. Europe is our most important trade partner. So in those areas, it's problematic. But there are other areas where I think it bears fruit, the president's attitude, and in fact represents a return to norm from where President Obama had taken American foreign policy way off from our norms. So, for example, recognition of Israel, Jerusalem as Israel's capital, that's a very Trumpian thing to do in a way, but at the same time, it's something that Congress had called for. It's something that, as the president said, is just acknowledging the reality that Jerusalem will be Israel's capital. So in those areas, I actually welcome a Trumpian attitude, and I don't think it should be written off altogether as, oh, he's crazy and he's going to disturb world order.
Sohrab Ahmari, senior writer for Commentary Magazine, thank you for weighing in.
Thanks, Lauren.
President Trump says his dream is to achieve peace in the Middle East before the end of his first term. We are now learning more about how he wants to end the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. Today, the president gave his most direct endorsement of a two-state solution. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. During a meeting with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in New York, the president acknowledged the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has been raging for decades, but today he gave more insight into how he thinks it's possible to solve what he calls the toughest of all deals.
I like two-state solution. Yeah, that's what I think. That's what I think works best. I don't even have to speak to anybody. That's my feeling. Now, you may have a different feeling. I don't think so. But I think two-state solution works best.
The president said by moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem earlier this year, it took one of the biggest chips off the negotiating table. That move was opposed by Palestinians. A United Nations vote in December united many countries, including U.S. allies, against the president's decision to move the embassy. Critics of the president's America First approach at this year's United Nations General Assembly believe he continues to alienate allies. Here's how a top White House official, Mercedes Schlapp, responded when I asked her about that.
I think he was very transparent with his message, and he has a wonderful relationship with so many of our allies, including Great Britain and France. And obviously he wants to continue working with our allies on the issues that matter, including improving trade deals with them.
Looking ahead to tomorrow, the president will be back here at the White House where he will meet with Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General. Rosenstein's future in that role is in question. He was reportedly expecting to be fired earlier this week after a New York Times article said he discussed plans to secretly record President Trump and use constitutional power to remove him from office. Rosenstein denies it. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. A third woman accuses Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh of abuse, and senators are scrambling ahead of a make-or-break hearing with Kavanaugh and his first accuser tomorrow. Both will face tough questions under oath. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi previews the hearing. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Julie Swetnick tells the Senate she witnessed Kavanaugh consistently engage in excessive drinking and inappropriate contact of a sexual nature with women in the early 1980s. The judge denies this new allegation, and he has the others, calling this one from the Twilight Zone. Tomorrow we'll hear from the first of now 3 accusers.
Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, who says Kavanaugh forced himself upon her in high school, prepares to speak directly to senators and the world.
We're doing everything we can to do what Dr. Ford said in her letter to me. She wanted a public meeting. She didn't want it to be a media circus. She wants to feel comfortable. So we're doing everything to make her feel comfortable.
Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley has hired Arizona prosecutor Rachel Mitchell to question Ford and Kavanaugh. She serves in Arizona as a Special Victims Division chief, which covers sex crimes. But Democrats tell me Republicans are wrong.
Our constitutional duty is to ask questions and seek answers, not rely on someone else. The question is, why are my Republican colleagues hiding?
Hanging in the balance, a possible conservative swing for the Supreme Court, including on abortion. Today, conservatives gather outside the Capitol in support of Kavanaugh.
I just believe that we need more conservatives on the Supreme Court. And I think Trump is doing an amazing job, and I support everything that he does, including confirming Kavanaugh. It's time.
It's so awful to convict someone before they've ever been heard. That isn't our country. You are innocent until proven guilty, and there's no proof.
Lawyers for Ford gave the Senate committee results from an August lie detector test. Now the Senate Judiciary Committee is scheduled Friday to vote on Brett Kavanaugh's Supreme Court nomination. Looking at the numbers of undecided voters right now in the whole chamber, though, we don't know if the full Senate will be able to confirm Kavanaugh. Lauren?
Jason, will the Senate hear from the 2 other Kavanaugh accusers?
Well, the committee says it is investigating their claims. Deborah Ramirez accused Kavanaugh of exposing himself while they were students at Yale. Her attorney says she would be willing to testify, but probably not likely until after an FBI investigation.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Lawmakers in Pennsylvania approve a preliminary plan for victims of clergy abuse to file lawsuits, even on claims beyond the statute of limitations. The proposal now goes to the Senate. Also today, the state Supreme Court heard arguments over whether to eliminate redactions in that grand jury report. A second diocese in Ohio plans to release a list of priests removed for sexual abuse allegations. Steubenville diocese officials expect the release by the end of October. Bishop Jeffrey Monforton says it is in the interest of transparency and accountability. Pope Francis is calling on Catholics in China to trust him and have faith in the deal the Vatican signed with Beijing, unifying the Catholic Church in the country.
Auspico che in Cina si possa aprire una nuova fase.
The Pope told the faithful in St. Peter's Square this morning he hoped the agreement would be a new chapter with relations in China. In a letter to the Chinese Catholics, the Holy Father says he takes full responsibility for the deal and called for gestures of reconciliation. Vatican correspondent Juliette Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliette, the main sticking point with any accord with Beijing was always bishops' nominations. So what did the Pope say to clarify that front? What did he have to say about future relations between Beijing and the Holy See?
Lauren, the Pope says he will ultimately have the final say over naming new bishops. He says the deal will create some suffering amongst the Chinese faithful, and he takes full responsibility. Now, in the past, some bishops were chosen by the Beijing government and some by the Pope. Now, aboard the papal plane last night coming back from the Baltic nations, Francis highlighted the temporary nature of this deal, indicating that if bishops' nominations continue to cause problems, the accord could be altered. Now, Francis quoted Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI in saying that comprehension serves neither the interests of the Chinese people nor those of the Catholic Church in China, and he expressed hope that social development will be promoted by ensuring greater respect for human rights, for religious freedom, and for the environment, Lauren.
What reaction have you heard from those who have long expressed skepticism over Beijing's willingness to strike a fair deal?
Lauren, we reached out to Cardinal Joseph Zen in Hong Kong, who's been on EWTN News Nightly with you, Lauren, and he's calling the deal a sellout for the church. He says he tells EWTN he's not in touch with the Vatican these days and has no plans to come to Rome in the near future. Now, as we know, Zen has long championed the cause of the underground church, which for decades endured persecution for refusing to join the state church and for staying loyal to the Holy See. But the Holy Father says he's already received messages from Chinese Catholics saying that they are willing to accept the deal.
Now, Pope Francis also mentioned on his way back yesterday the Pennsylvania grand jury report. What was the point he was making? Did he mention the attack on his leadership by former Vatican ambassador Carlo Vigano?
Lauren, Pope Francis says it's unfair to apply modern standards to the Catholic Church since everyone covered up the crime in the past. Now, Francis didn't excuse the cover-up by some church leaders, but the Pope said that it's unfair to judge it by today's standards. Lauren, the Holy Father didn't mention Vigano in actual fact by name. He said that, quote, bishops from around the whole world wrote to him to say that they were close to him and that they were praying for him. And he added that one of the letters came from China and was actually signed jointly by a bishop from the Patriotic Association and one who is faithful to the Holy See.
Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
We just heard from the Vatican, and in China, officials say they are sincere in wanting to improve ties with the Holy See.
推动双方的关系改善进程
China's foreign minister is saying he wants to enhance mutual understanding and trust between the Holy See and Beijing. There are an estimated 12 million Catholics in the communist nation. The Russian Navy test fires a supersonic cruise missile. RT reports the rocket can travel nearly 2,000 miles per hour. It would be used mainly to target ships at sea. There is a lot more coming up tonight on our newscast. A Washington journalist examines the most recent allegation of sexual abuse against Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. As we heard earlier in the show, Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and the first woman accusing him of sexual misconduct will testify tomorrow on Capitol Hill. Also in the spotlight, the woman asking the questions. Joining me now for more analysis is Christopher Bedford, editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about this woman, Rachel Mitchell, a female prosecutor from Arizona with decades of experience prosecuting sex crime. She is asking questions on behalf of male Republican senators. They have come under fire for allowing this to happen. Is there any reason to think that this will make a difference in the toughness of the questions?
I think it probably will get more to the substance of the matter. She's got experience not just investigating sexual assault, but investigating cold cases of sexual assault. Those are much more difficult, things that were ignored, things, especially when it turned out that her local sheriff hadn't been furthering some of these cases to the prosecutor's office. She had to find those cases, get the evidence. And Republicans were put in a bind where it was called sexist to have old white men questioning a woman on accusations, although yesterday the New York Times said it was sexist for them to make it a woman's job. There's no real winning for the GOP.
There is no winning, and I saw Democrats actually attacking Republicans for not manning up to do it themselves. So anyway, in preparing for tomorrow, Judge Kavanaugh has had the full backing of the White House, and he has testified before. And he's got all of the skills set to know what's going to happen, how to answer the questions. Do you think that is a big advantage in a trial like this?
Maybe, but it hasn't.
A hearing.
Yeah, it may as well be. I mean, the Senate does kind of act as a little bit of a court system in itself. It ought to be, but he didn't. His interview came across as a little stilted, more political. When he talked to Fox News and just kept on saying, for every question, he wants just a fair and balanced hearing. It came across as a little political. I understand that it was emotional. He was clearly emotional, and that may have been a good thing to show that this is a human being. And
this was his interview, to clarify for our viewers, that he gave to Fox News last night, or the night before, 2 nights ago now. Where he and his wife answered questions about the whole spectacle. I want to talk to you about the role of the media in this story now that you've brought it up, and that interview. Did it help him or hurt him?
It most likely helped him. We don't know. I don't have the polling on this, but I looked at it and I thought, wow, this guy looks a little cardboard and it looks a little weak up there. I couldn't imagine Justice Clarence Thomas getting weepy, but at the same time, he's being portrayed as some kind of psychotic rapist or sexual abuser of women. And what came across there was somebody who had near tears in his eyes, sitting next to his wife, saying, I am innocent of these crimes. It didn't come across as any kind of a predator. So in that case, it's more humanizing for him.
Catholic. You're Catholic. I'm Catholic. This is a Catholic network. He's Catholic. Is there a Catholic angle or perspective to this story?
Maybe I would say so, because one, Catholics would always want a moral judge represented on their highest court, not someone who's a serial predator. But also, what's really ironic about this whole situation is that the Judeo-Christian legal system that's been built from Jerusalem to London to Washington, with Rome in the middle, has relied on innocence until proven guilty, being able to face your accusers, not just being attacked like this, and to have senators questioning about the Supreme Court if this person even has a right to be considered innocent. That's a very un-Christian perspective.
Thank you so much for your perspective. Christopher Bedford, editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller.
Thank you.
30,000 people are honoring a modern saint in his hometown in Italy. More coming up on that later in the newscast, plus why 14,000 people attended an initiative by a diocese in Michigan. "30,000 people honored St. Padre Pio at midnight mass last Saturday in his hometown of southern Italy, and it was the 50th anniversary of his death. Among the attendees, Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte. Last weekend also marked 100 years since Padre Pio received the stigmata, or wounds of Christ. A Catholic group in San Francisco is teaching Gregorian chant to prison inmates. The Benedict XVI Institute over the summer founded a traveling choir that teaches sacred music. The first assignment, San Quentin Penitentiary. And late last month, 25 prisoners sang the parts of a traditional Latin Mass. For more on this story, including what other groups in San Francisco are learning and how they're learning Gregorian chant, visit EWTN's National Catholic Register at ncregister.com. Finally, tonight, it is common to hear cheering at Michigan State University's Breslin Center, home of successful college basketball teams. My producer from Michigan wrote that, I'm sure. Last Saturday, 14,000 people made noise for a Catholic event. The Diocese of Lansing hosted Made for Happiness, and the purpose? To urge Catholics to be unafraid to live their faith in public. Speakers included author and radio host Jennifer Fulwiler. Before the event, thousands marched roughly 3 miles from the state capitol building to the arena. That does it for all of us happy people here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. We'll leave you tonight with images from today's weekly meeting with the Pope and pilgrims in St. Peter's Square. Good night, and God bless you.